Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to those of you who've just tuned in. We're now moving on to the next part of the program, the panel discussion, Luck of the Draw, using modified lotteries and research funding. Again, if you have questions during the discussion, please post them in the chat. We'll address them afterwards. It's my pleasure to welcome Marco Bieri, Paulina Kleinfeld, Marie-José and Rink Hoekstra, who will host the discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Babette. Yeah, this seems like an interest that this is going to be an interesting discussion, and actually, it's generalizing the discussion that we just had. We just saw the drawing system playing a role when awarding the open research awards. Well, in science, we have many prizes, some even more prestigious than that, and some grants, and well, it's interesting to see whether using draws more often would be a good idea or not. And we have three very interesting panelists to discuss that. Before introducing them, a few rules for the discussion. Discussions often tend to polarize opinions. I personally prefer them to be as nuanced as possible. So just say whatever you think, and also show ambivalence if you have some, and that's completely fine here. I don't think that's going to be a big risk with this topic, but you never know. I'll try to stay back from discussion as much as possible. I'll ask a few questions if necessary, but please respond to each other if you want to. That's completely fine. So don't wait for me to give you a turn. If you want to respond to one of the other panelists, that's completely fine with me. Without further ado, let's talk about the three panelists. And well, it's a good custom to start with the one who is living furthest away. Marco Bieri, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thanks. He's a scientific officer at the Swiss National Science Foundation, and well, they actually experimented with a pilot on this in using a drawing system for awards they for a certain funding scheme, the Swiss National Science Foundation Mobility Funding Scheme. So he has actual experience. Well, in a minute, I'll give him the floor to explain his ideas on this. We have two other panelists. Paulina Kleinfeld, she is a professor of ethics and its history. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that it's interesting to look at this from an ethical point of view, because if luck suddenly plays a role, yeah, what does it mean if luck can affect your career so directly? Is that fair or not? So we'll discuss that. Marie-José is an assistant professor here in Groningen. Well, not unfamiliar with getting grants herself. And well, she's among others a member of the Young Academy Netherlands and also in Groningen. So Marco, I would like you, because for the rest of the audience, all panelists have prepared some kind of a short introduction or opinion about this response to this idea. Marco, would you like to start?
Yes, should I start by briefly introducing myself, what I do at the SNF, or would you like me to start with the pilot we did?
If I left out information that is interesting for the audience, please feel free to introduce yourself a bit more, and then you can continue with okay, your ideas about it.
So just to briefly, maybe explain briefly what I do at the SNF as a scientific officer. So the scientific office manages the evaluation process. You know, we check the applications formally, we assign reviewers, we support the evaluation panels. And I am a person who witnesses quite a lot of panel meetings where the panels debate, the members debate on and discuss applications and then take funding decisions in the end. And I'm also responsible, I pay attention that the evaluation goes according to our standards, that it complies with our regulations and that everything goes correctly. And I also communicate the decisions to the candidates. So I'm in touch also with the candidates, which sometimes also have questions. Well, then if you allow, I would now briefly talk about this pilot we did at the SNF. Maybe I start with the motivation, why we did this. So first and foremost, on top, it is well known and documented that peer review has limitations, such as, for instance, that there is evidence that it is rather bias against innovative research. It's fairly clear evidence that it's a weak predictor for future research performance, and there's also fairly clear evidence that ratings of raters, experts who evaluate applications, varies considerably. And it is also known that there is a randomness inherent in the review system. And then this field of research that investigates, among other things, peer review is often called research on research, encourages funders to account for uncertainty in their peer review process, and also to consider an element of randomness in the funding allocation process. So that's one important point. The other, then, you just mentioned a specific scheme, the post-mobility funding scheme. It's a scheme that addresses junior postdocs that want to go abroad to make a research stay. And here we have a special situation. We know that due to a simplification of the funding portfolio, we will receive many more applications for these schemes. And so we knew that we had to modify our evaluation procedure, and we took this context also as an opportunity, to take into account of the latest knowledge of research on research, and that is why we tested this random selection element in 2019 last year, and that involved 2 post-mobility calls. Now I can go more into detail quickly, say how we actually did this. We implemented this. So we, of course, informed the applicants, candidates, about this change in the evaluation procedure, so they knew when they apply that there is going to be a potential random selection on a few cases, borderline cases. We also informed our panels, of course, about this random selection element. And the panels now, they had this random selection at hand as an additional element in the selection process. Whenever there was a set of equally qualified applications that could not be distinguished any more clearly according to our defined criteria, and when the funding line, the funding threshold, just split such a group of equally qualified applications, then to avoid arbitrariness, the panels had the possibility to draw lots in order to decide on these borderline cases at the funding threshold. So overall, in the last year, the panels evaluated 269 applications, and for 12 applications, that a share of 4%, the decisions were actually taken by drawing lots. And then the SNF, of course, we informed the candidates. Every applicant is informed about the outcome of the evaluation in the form of a ruling. Applicants have the right to contest and also appeal even before court to any decision the SNF takes. And the candidates, they were, of course, informed about the outcome and whether, when they were affected by the random selection, they had an indication in the ruling that they were actually selected by drawing lots, and also, of course, when they were excluded by drawing lots. In the case of a rejection, they also received a scientific justification, which allows the applicants to improve their application, to resubmit it, and then try it for the second evaluation round. We also submitted a letter of acknowledgement to the excluded candidates, which were excluded by drawing lots, conveying an approved but not funded message. So we said basically, if we had had all money available, we would have funded all of these applications that were in the lottery decision. So the applicants also knew and got an approved and funded message. So we approved the quality of their applications. Also, we could unfortunately not fund them. Now, briefly, the lessons, the most important lessons we learned from this pilot. You know, the announcement of this random selection, it raised some controversy in the panels. So we had full approval from panel members to full rejection, contesting and saying that is not a good idea doing a random selection. They put different arguments forward for and against a random selection, despite knowledge from the literature that and the limitations of peer review. And we also learned that communication is key, is very important, you know, to really make people understand why we do this, so there are no misunderstandings, which had to be clarified sometimes. But we made the experience that with time and use, with practical experience, the acceptability has been increasing, and today we can use we continue to use the random selection for this post-mobility scheme. The applicants so far, they accepted all these decisions. We had some feedback, questions, more technical questions, how we did this precisely, how we applied the random selection. But the decision as such was not contested so far or appealed by the candidates which were concerned. Then we also learned that it's very important to define clear criteria to actually define a group of applications for the random selection. It may sound an easy task, but it's not that easy to really apply objective criteria to define potential groups of applications for the random selection. So we exploit, at the moment, the SNF exploits statistical methods to improve, you know, to be used for the placing of the funding line and also to define these random selection groups of applications. Then eventually and finally, based on scientific evidence around peer review, based on the experiences we made by this pilot, the presiding board of the research council decided to introduce the possibility of the random selection for all its funding schemes at the SNF. So also other schemes have the possibility to introduce this random selection in their funding allocation processes. So far, this implementation is still ongoing, is not yet done. But with time, I guess it's very likely that also other schemes may in the future also consider using a random selection in the funding allocation process. So that's to start a brief outline of the pilot video.
Thank you. Well, one tiny thing, maybe you can move the mic a little bit further because there is some resonance there, but
okay.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think, yeah, maybe that helps, or put it a little lower. Paulina Kleinfeld, would you respond to this, or would you at first start by giving your ethical view on this this idea?
Sure. Thanks for the invitation. Can you hear me all right? Great. So I think it's an excellent idea to discuss this. I must say I have no experience with lottery systems myself. I do have some experience with grants on both sides of the table, so I have some good experiences and some bad experience writing them, submitting them. And I've been a member of evaluation committees for several granting agencies. So I've seen the process from both sides. And I think that the biggest problem at the moment is the low success rate in many funding programs, and the lottery system is intended somewhat to address that, but I'm not sure how successful it is in addressing that specific root of the problem, a problem which leads to inefficiency, huge inefficiency, and a waste of research time, and also in some cases indeed to arbitrariness or unfairness. Now, I think the committees in general do an honest job. I think they do an important job. I think the committees are important as additions to the peer review process of referees. But I do believe that with the current low rates of funding, often you have problems of the following kind. I've experienced these, where you have a committee that has a lot of applicants. Referee reports come in, the committee looks at the applications, and then the committee has a group, say of 10 or whatever number you want to pick, of proposals judged excellent, and they can only award 3 grants. At that stage, the committee does no longer have any criteria of quality for making its final pick. And that means that other criteria come in, and that leads to problems of sometimes arbitrariness, sometimes unfairness, and arbitrariness is unfair. So I think in those kinds of cases, and I think that was also the Swiss model, in such kinds of cases, a lottery system might in fact do a good job. But it doesn't, in my view, address the main problem, which is the inefficiency of the system. And so I don't think, sometimes people say that it leads to, less of a waste of time. And I don't think you can do away with the committee. I don't think you can do away with the peer review. And I don't think people will write any fewer proposals as a result of the introduction of this lottery system. But in the specific set of circumstances that I just described, I think it can play a good role. I do think you get practical problems, one of which was already mentioned, the question of how do you define the group within which you do the lottery system. I think committee members may feel like if only we talk longer, perhaps we reach more consensus about qualitative differences. And so at which point do you stop that process, especially if there's controversy in the panels about that. And I also wonder how you define criteria for success of the lottery system. So I would like to hear more about that later, but not now. But that's a question I have for Marco Bieri. One thing that I do see as a potential benefit of the lottery system is that it makes clear both to the winners and the losers that there is an element of, well, arbitrariness really at the final stage sometimes, if there are no qualitative differences that are clear to the committee members. Also, that if, say, an interdisciplinary committee has to make these final decisions among a large pool of candidates that rank equally, what you get is that a phenomenon where grants will be given precedence that appeal to most of the members of the committee, which means that people from other disciplines, often if it's an interdisciplinary committee, get to decide the course of, of research within specific disciplines. So in philosophy, for example, very so-called abstract topics will be less successful than applied topics, where members from other disciplines can easily see what the issue is and why it's important. And so you get those kinds of criteria that start playing a larger role if there aren't straightforward, the initial criteria of scholarly or scientific excellence as they're usually conceived. So I think if these borderline cases were selected through a lottery system, you wouldn't have that phenomenon that within any given discipline, a specific subset of grant proposals does better depending on how they appeal to members of other disciplines, right? Which is what's currently going on. So I think I'll stop here with my initial musings. We'll talk more.
Yes, definitely. I'm sure we'll come back to this, the issue of inefficiency that you brought up, but first I would like to give the floor to Marie-José. What do you think? What's your idea on this lottery system?
Yes, hi. Thank you for the invitation. Do you hear me well? Just
yes.
A small check. Okay.
If the two last speakers could turn up their volumes a little bit, that would be nice. But it's kind of on the soft side. But it's okay. I can hear you.
Okay. I can also speak up or just shout to you. That would also be a very clear way of communicating. Just some on the experience side. I've been well, among these borderline cases a few times that I was among the 19 that got a similar score, but got that blocked. And also I've been deemed eligible, for example, for a VENI grant and then didn't get it. And then luckily the next year, so luckily I got it. But so I know how it also is to be kind of evaluated as eligible while not getting it. And I think that distinction is very essential for the discussion on how we reward scientists, because that to make it in top is something that will be should be very important as well. I like the idea of, for these cases, to use the lottery system. And I'm very curious to hear from Dr. Bieri how this lottery system was also experienced by the panel members and what actually the advantages were. So was it more about the kind of perceived fairness, or did it also save a lot of time? Because following up on what Dr. Kleingeld said, I'm very curious what it saves in terms of efficiency. And I'm also very curious to hear what a more radical system, such as applied in the current Open Research Award approach, how that was received or perceived, and what would be the result of that, because especially given that some topics are less appealing to a larger audience, it would be very nice to experiment to see if that would lead to equal high quality research output as selecting on the actual proposal. So I would be very interested to hear and know what has been experimented with a much more radical system of just having some lower threshold and then not defining the proposals that are evaluated as being excellent by most panelists, but just also let go of that kind of top criterion.
Okay. Should I address this efficiency for what you mentioned? Well, you see from the numbers I told you, there were only very few cases in the lottery system for this first time we used it, and we used the random selection in that respect very carefully. We have to be also very careful, you know, that also the panel, they must support this this modified lottery, and we did not want to give an impression that the lottery, because of this modified lottery, that we make our life easier. You know, at the core is always peer review. We have to screen the applications first, do a quality check, and then we narrow the field until we end up with maybe a very few applications at the borderline where we have at the funding threshold where we can apply the random selection. So in general, the SNSF uses the random selection for only few applications, small share of applications which are tied at the funding threshold. Of course, here the efficiency gain is probably not that great, because you would have a more offensive system like maybe minimal admission criteria, once these are fulfilled, you could distribute the funds by the lottery, but a much larger share of applications. Here, the gain was in time was not that great, but it's, of course, it will be very efficient if, of course, the lottery will be used more excessively. If more, the share of applications really funded by random selection would be much greater, then of course you could improve the efficiency, right?
So are you aware of any research that looked into what if you would do a random selection of all kind of applications above a certain threshold, and how that would relate to the quality of the research output versus a kind of selection where we think we can select the quality a priori?
Yes, that's this admission criteria, and then applying random selection. You're right. Is I think also proposed in the literature. From there are not many funders up to now that use a random selection in their funding process. Actually, it's the Volkswagen Foundation in Germany, the Health Research Council in New Zealand, and very recently, it's the Austrian Research Fund who start to experiment with the random selection. I know that the Volkswagen Foundation, they use the random selection a bit more excessively. So I think among half of all the applications that are funded, half is funded by the jury and half is then selected by random. But we also have, I think, distinguish here between, I guess, the funding schemes also. Here at the SNF, the post-mobility, we speak about career funding scheme, individuals. Whereas the Volkswagen Foundation, they fund high-risk research projects on unconventional research idea. You can probably also politically, defend that easier to say, yeah, here we can apply random selection more rigorously. Probably also as a political statement of how this will be perceived also by the public, or so that is something we have to be careful. It's probably easier than for careers funding. We don't want to give the impression our evaluation goes on according to the same standards. And if we say, like, we subject 30% of applicants who apply for a mobility fellowship scheme to random selection, that will not be the message we want to convey. But that's why. But we continue, to evaluate according to the same standards. Now, these borderline cases, we believe that's a fairer way, a more honest way, a transparent way, also to communicate this decision for these cases to the applicant.
So, okay, it's one thing to get a grant. Another thing is that grants play a large part in evaluations, in getting tenure, getting promoted, etc. How do you think that evaluation committees should deal with that? So once grants have been awarded, people go up for tenure, for example. What do they? How do evaluations committees how should they look at it? Because now they can hide behind the system, and they could say, well, the awards have been awarded, and apparently you did a good job because you have an award, or you did not do a good enough job because you don't. But once someone can say, well, I did not get this award, but it was only because of luck, because of the drawing system, well, this person could rightfully argue, I would say, that his or her work is as good as the one who had been awarded. If you focus specifically on this award, so then the current system doesn't work anymore. And you could argue, well, that's a good thing because now there's luck involved as well, and now it's at least out in the open. But well, I think there are the current evaluation system doesn't work if we are to introduce this. Maybe it doesn't work now, but it definitely doesn't work if we are to introduce this. Paulina, would you care to say something about that?
Well, I would say that using a granting scheme for the purpose of career promotions is actually it not the right kind of reason for applying for a grant, right? And so I think it is a problem that the success in grants has gained such a large role in hiring and promotion contexts. So I think that if lotteries became part of the system, that would not be that might have in fact the results that that emphasis is becoming a little less. That would be a good thing, I think, especially given the low funding rates and the low success rates and the large role of some arbitrary factors. It would be a good thing that people could say, well, I didn't get it, but it was a lottery. So it would take some of that pressure off the granting scheme, because I think it's not, if you apply for a grant, you have to do that because you want to do the research and you have a good idea. If you apply for grants just so that you can get a promotion in your own institution, I think then you're weighing on this funding scheme. You're contributing to these inefficiencies. Well, not for the right reason.
No, but you can't blame people for doing that, right? I mean, it's a means to an end. We have this. You can't blame people for pragmatically or opportunistically even applying for grants just because this is the only way for them to, well, maybe get a job or keep their job or something, right?
I'm not blaming the applicants at all. I'm saying in the current system, there's too much weight on success in these granting schemes, which forces junior people into a position where they have to participate if they want to get a permanent job or want to make a promotion. People are forced to take part in it if they want job security, and I think that's a problem.
Yeah, so you brought up the issue.
There are many other things that academics have to do, and have to do very well, on the basis of which you can evaluate people and see whether they are, deserve a full-time position. So, not just the success in granting schemes.
So do I paraphrase you correctly that you're saying, well, inefficiency is a problem, but and well, the discussion between Marie-José and Marco was also about like when you start this, it doesn't immediately affect inefficiency, but indirectly it could, right? Because it might affect the evaluation system in the long run, and therefore it might affect how people, well, the more opportunistic people might think, okay, I don't want to have this grant in the first place. I only did it for my career, so now I don't apply. And then there is some efficiency gain. Is that what you're saying?
Well, maybe, and also on the part of deans and universities, if it's out in the open that part of these decisions by funders are not purely on the basis of quality, that might take some weight of that success for the purpose of promotion within your line of work, if you see what I mean, right? So
yeah, sure.
A dean could say, well, even though she didn't get this or that grant, nevertheless, she deserves the promotion because, we all know that luck plays a role in the process. Okay. So, yeah, it might indirectly have that kind of role. But that depends on how it's done. Sorry. And if it's really done in this very limited, small-scale way in which Marco Bieri described, that might just be all that's needed or not. I don't know. That's an empirical question. So I would be interested in how these committees, for example, decided which group to use for the lottery, right? And how that process went.
Yes, I can explain you how this was done. That was also something that we want to improve. That was also a first, a learning experience in that sense. So, and that's also linked how actually funders score applications. That's intimately linked on the grading system we use. So panels, the panels discuss, the members discuss the applications, then they vote on it, and then there is a final vote being calculated, and the applications are ranked according to these votes. And then for the random selection, we disclose, we hided all the information that the panels, they only inspect the scores, the variation of the scores, which is the quality indicator. That's the panel vote in the end. And the panels, they only inspected the scores, but they did not see at that time which application it was, who the applicant was, which research field is behind, because we didn't want to reintroduce a bias also when it comes to the definition of this random selection group. So they inspected the scores, and sometimes, there are clear gaps, a clear gap between two applications just at the funding threshold, where you can say, well, that's a significant gap, that is a meaningful gap, and we can leave here the situation as is. Or there were effectively, applications with almost similar score around the funding threshold, and then the panels could decide, to apply for these cases then the random selection. But this is not really, it is not easy also, to inspect and to define random selection groups based on these scores. So that's why we now want to refine our statistical methods. We want to take into account, the votes, the number of persons who voted, of course, and also how deviation of the votes, if it's consensus or I mean, you can arrive to a certain mean value, but whether you have votes that really go from one end to the other, or everybody agrees. You have to take this into account, and we're trying to refine this procedure so we can really, based on objective criteria, identify then these random selection groups. Yeah. But it's not a trivial task, actually. It's not a trivial task. And so far, funders, there are so interesting papers out there where funders, they use scoring systems, but sometimes, when you actually do some statistics on it and try to understand what a meaningful precision is when you calculate a mean score of a panel, then you would actually mean much more, panelists, or I mean, it's also connected to each other, So statistical methods is something we follow now, to be more to identify in a more robust way and objective way these random selection groups.
Okay. Marie-José, maybe you can say something about the following, because well, we've discussed the lottery as a potential solution to some of the problems in the current system. Are we overlooking other solutions, or well, maybe more extreme? Do we need grants in the first place? I mean, so
yeah, I think I have something to say about that also as a follow-up to the question of Ineke Wessel in the chat. That concerns, I think, the rolling grant proposal of just giving some basic funding to everyone working in academia, starting at assistant professor level. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
yeah, well, yeah, yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I can try. Is it better now?
Yeah, maybe it's
yes for me. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would be certainly in favor of giving some basic funding for every researcher just to continue the research, and also to undertake a bit more riskier or long-term research and to rely on some structural funding. I am always astonished by the inefficiency or the amount of time that goes into grant writing. I think it's good for every researcher to spend time on writing a good grant proposal. And it will always help you in refining your thinking and ideas. But if I see the amount of time that goes into it and into reviewing and then selecting, I think if we would just sum up all this this time, that would also show how inefficient the system is. And there's also this nice +1 paper from 2017 from Fazen and Katza that also shows that if you would just give the money to the, if you would kind of completely, I don't dare to say, but blow up the Dutch Research Council, and just would distribute this money to research directly, that would be a very workable solution where you would have quite some funding for every researcher. And I think that has a number of advantages, including, and I like the idea from the or the faculty behavioral and social sciences that they also reward the fact that you're found eligible for a grant proposal. But still, I think that you then rely upon the work of all these committees to select whether your ideas are good. And that puts a lot of pressure on the system. So if we want to lower the pressure on the system, I think it would save us an enormous amount of time, and also would lead to very good research, because we can just also decide on the small questions or the small methodological steps that needs to be taken before doing the kind of more provoking research that that reviewers seem to like.
Yeah, so one more question, and then I get to another question in the chat. So it seems like we all agree, or you all agree on that change is needed. That awards and grants are too prominent in current academia. If I talk to my colleagues, and that's very anecdotal, but I've rarely heard people advocate for more grants. I mean, so apparently we seem to agree that there is a problem, and still we have this system. Like what structure or what incentives are there to keep the structure as it is? Well, why are we doing this? Can someone say something about that, Pauline?
Well, this was a conscious decision. I don't recall exactly when it happened, but it was about 10 or so years ago, under Plasterk as the Minister of Education and Science, if I'm correct, where 100 million euros was taken from the university funding, shifted to NWO, with the express purpose that we being the academics of the Netherlands, try our best to get that money back to our universities, right? And to increase competition. So this was an explicit move, a conscious decision to make this happen, to take money away from the standard research time that we all get as part of our appointments if you're in a so-called regular position. But yeah, and that's why we're stuck with this system. And that then sets in motion this whole dynamic that people need to get these grants in order to get promotions. And that it then gets an ever greater role within the university system, because you have this impulse that then sort of starts to lead a life of its own.
Yeah, to be honest, I've never seen evidence for that improving the quality or improving even the quantity, if that's what you're after, of research. So I've never really understood it myself, but maybe some of you have seen evidence that says that if you introduce competition, the research becomes better.
So I did not endorse the move, right? I just gave a little historical comment.
That's clear by now. Yeah.
In response to your question of why are we doing this? And so I do believe there is evidence that people who don't do well in the funding scheme sometimes do at least as well, in their research. But I haven't done that research, and I'm not familiar with the specifics of whether. And I think Marco Bieri started saying something about the grants not correlating with research success or so, which would indicate that, but I don't know whether the system empirically works well for science and scholarship or not.
Grants, the problem is also, grants are very prestigious. They have become like this because everybody, asks for grant or requests, if you win a fellowship or go abroad. And it's also the competition, of course, which you have, and which is also wanted in some way, international competition even, or it's highly competitive, and it comes at a cost. It's costly and time consuming, this system, this competition. And what Marie-José said, that's also what I like, that we could also, support more the basis institutions, professors, which also hire postdocs or PhD students, not only via grants, which, because the system, as you all said, is really very, there's a lot of burden on the whole system because of that, yes.
So, well, Pauline was already indicating that there are often political decisions underlying this entire system that we're having. Nevertheless, Marjolein Niebuhr is asking, maybe, well, there is some power at the university board level. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but are they seeing this problem clear enough? Are they and this is a particular Groningen question. I'm sorry, Marco, but
okay.
Is there any change going on? Is there will we be at a better place in 5 years from now or something? According, for example, to the strategic plan. Is Marie-José, could you say something about that? Do you have an idea about that?
I'm not involved on the erkennen en waarderen part of the strategic plan, but I think this is on everyone's mind, that we should really rethink how we reward and promote researchers, and based on what qualities we also, if we want to have a diversity in types of researchers, I think we should not only depend on the amount of money that people bring in. I think that a number of our deans are also members of the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences, and also support this rolling grant idea. So I do think that it is on the radar of many deans, so it's also communicated within the board of deans. I don't, yeah, I think they are aware of the impact that getting a grant or just not getting a grant has. But for example, in the tenure track criteria of the UMCG, you cannot list the which grants you attempted to get, but only the ones you really got in the end. So I think there is room for improvement. But on the other hand, there's other qualities that are being recognized and rewarded together. So, yeah, I think there's hope for the future, and I think people are aware of this issue as well.
I agree.
Okay. That seems like a hopeful ending of this discussion, which is nice after we've been quite critical. Thank you very much, Marco, Marie-José, Paulina. Thank you for your contributions. I don't know whether there will be any questions in the chat left that you want to respond to. You can do that afterwards. Babette, I'd like to give the floor to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rink. Thanks very much for this very interesting discussion and the very lively discussion. It was followed on Twitter as well, so I think this remains just the hot topic. I'd now like to give the floor to my colleague Julia for the closing remarks.
Yes, thank you, Babette, and thank you to Rink and all the panelists. So the event has almost reached the end. So it's time for closing remarks and for some thank yous. So please bear with me because I have quite a few thank yous to say. First of all, I would like to thank all of our amazing keynote speakers today, Simina and Ineke, and then the 3 winners of the Open Research Award, and the panelists again. The presentations were all excellent and inspiring, and also the discussion was stimulating and interesting. Also a big thank you to all the people that submitted their case studies for the Open Research Award but didn't win. Thank you. And thanks to all the participants today for the contributions and the participation. And it's great to see that the turnout was good. because I think it means that it's a clear sign of how the topic resonates with the academic community, which is great. Another important part of this is the management team of the university library for trusting us to develop the Open Research Award, and also for granting us the funds to continue to do it in the coming years. It's been really wonderful and rewarding and also fun to develop the award and organize this event with my colleague Babette, and also with the library's communication team. They were really of great help, and also with Vera and Maud from the University of Groningen. I really cannot think of better people to collaborate with on such a project. We hope you enjoyed celebrating openness with us today. We hope there will be many more occasions to do so in the coming years, and there will be many more Open Research Awards.